Hi again. Just got back in for a swim and I feel all refreshed and invigorated. So what better time is there to do a UAsk IAnswer? I hope you're all well. We are now on to video 7. I recently got a message from via LinkedIn from an Alicia Jacob Matthews who hails from Malaysia, and she asked, as a CM peer, I wanted to ask you about some of the trends in communication channels that are being adopted by organisations nowadays. Have you done any research on this? I said, sorry, no, I haven't, but following a further exchange, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute, I suggested that Alicia send me a question for this UAsk IAnswer series. Makes sense, really. So this is actually what I got. This is the question. There are many trending communication channels nowadays, and organisations just seem to want to use these rather than traditional mechanisms, thinking they will suffice when it comes to communicating change. What's your take on this? Communication, the be-all and end-all of change. So this video can kind of ramble on forever and a day, but I'm not going to let it. I'm going to keep it brief, succinct and to the point, just like any communication should be. Okay. I mentioned the LinkedIn messaging exchange with Alicia just a minute ago, so I thought I'd just give you a few extracts of what I said from that exchange. Excuse me, I'm a little bit sweaty because I've been in the swimming pool for an hour or so. I'm still seeing the same channels as used before, such as notice boards with leaflets and posters, newsletters, email, intranet portals, SharePoint, magazines, etc. But I'm also seeing and have increasingly used things like smartphone messaging apps and enterprise social networking tools. More about those in a moment. I have a saying that I always tend to use, which is horses for courses. So each organisation will have their favoured communication mechanisms, be they trending or traditional. The main thing for me is to make sure that the message length and content are relevant to the channel being used. And finally, don't forget, the most important channel is still face-to-face, but sadly not at the moment. Well, yes, it is at the moment, but it's online. Slightly different. Right, okay, let's start in earnest then, shall we? I'm sure you've heard it many, many, many times before, but I'll say it again. Communication is the key when you want people to change. But in contrast, communication is an area that is most frequently complained about by people, employees. Clearly, there is a gap. As change managers, one of the first and most important tasks that we have is to create an all-encompassing communications plan, following engagement from your sponsor, who will provide input to that, and your key stakeholders, who will also provide input into that. Just on those three things, communication, stakeholders and sponsors, I've said it before, said that again, haven't I? But I'll say it again, those are the three foundations of successful change. And a quick plug from which I've done before, but hey, whatever. From my practical framework approach to change, I have the following communication guidelines. Recognize that everything you say and do influences your company. You are the change. Be visible. Listen. Have one-on-one or group meetings. Provide consistent and timely messages to all identified stakeholders. Select an appropriate sender of the message because of their influence. I mentioned sponsor earlier on, so a sponsor should actually send out the sponsorship statement. Makes sense really, doesn't it? Determine the best vehicle for communication, and we've talked about vehicles previously and we'll talk about it again in a minute. KISS, keep it simple. stupid, silly, I can never remember what it is. In other words, eliminate jargon. That is one of my favourites. Too many three-letter acronyms are being bandied about all the time. Repeat messages, ideas sink in deeply only if they've been heard many times before. Easier said than done, but hey, they're just guidelines anyway, so. In days gone by, there's a song there, again. Those were the days, my friend. Enough. Sorry. In days gone by, we would look at various ways to communicate to ensure the above, what I've just said earlier on, factors were met. So, face to face. Departmental meetings, team, group meetings, focus groups, one-to-one meetings, roadshows, workshops, lunch and learns, and town halls, to name but a few. Non-face-to-face. Emails, notice boards, FAQs, leaflets and posters, project newsletters, intranet, social media, screensaver messages, to name but a few more. But obviously we are in a different place now with the ever increasing pace of change through digitization, or is it digitalization? I never know what the difference is, to be honest. AI, RPA, ERP, machine learning, blockchain, you name it, it's all there. So do the above still cut it, both the face-to-face and the non-face-to-face? Well, I kind of think most of them do, but maybe some don't as well as others. Right? Before I go on, let me just say that one of the best and most successful things I ever did within the context of communication on a project in Singapore for GlaxoSmithKline was to create laminated how-tos, hard copy, laminated how-tos, and actually physically put them on people's desks, instructing them how to log onto Wi-Fi, instructing them on how to log onto their printer, etc. That, coupled with lots of large pull-up banners scattered around the building, worked an absolute treat. You couldn't miss them. So people saw them, they were in your face. It was really, really effective. Great, okay. Anyway, moving on. One of the main issues we face today is the amount of information that needs to be disseminated, and the multitude of channels, and I've mentioned them again, we can use to do that. That, coupled with our ever decreasing attention span, is a real challenge. Talking of attention spans, if you haven't already noticed, in general, they're deteriorating, decreasing. According to a study by Microsoft not so long ago, I can't remember, I think it was last year or maybe the year before, the human being now has an attention span of only 8 seconds. Yeah, 8 seconds. This is in sharp contrast to the average attention span of 12 seconds 20 years ago. We're losing a second of attention span every 5 years. That's pretty frightening, to be honest. The problem is it's a deluge of short sound bites, messages and social media, which has created a society that simply does not have a lot of time to look and to listen. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at 2 ways we can communicate in today's new world to try and grab the attention of people who have a disposition to only want to engage in a social way rather than the more traditional channels. First up, we all know them, we've used them, probably all of us, chat apps, yeah? Rightly or wrongly, these have become the de facto way to communicate, and anyone who ignores these does so at their own peril. Depending on which part of the world you operate in, there's various different ones, and the most popular ones are WhatsApp, obviously, WeChat, Viber, Line, and Telegram. Next up is enterprise social networking tools. These are ideal for widespread teams as they can utilize the solution to communicate and collaborate seamlessly from wherever they are. The 3 most popular, Horizon, Slack, and Yammer. Personally, I've used Yammer, I've used WhatsApp, I've used Line extensively. But to repeat what I said before, horses for courses. It's entirely up to you and your organisation what you use. So let's go back to traditional communication for a short while. As I said, there is still a place for the traditional ways of communicating, and face-to-face, when we can get back to that, still has to take priority and be the preferred mechanism, but clearly not in our present circumstances. But creating good face-to-face communication means a lot of time and effort, not only from those organising and delivering the messages, but also for the target audience, who have to give up their time and away from their day-to-day activities to attend these big gatherings, be they team meetings, lunch and learns, be they whatever, town halls, etc. But taking people away from their office environment, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I'd kind of say it was a good thing, and I think we're all going to get fed up in time with all of this online face-to-face. I think we'll be glad to get back to proper face-to-face, whenever that might be. Anyway, moving on to non-face-to-face channels, the key is to use as many as possible, because what one person will like, the other won't. Make sure that the content is appropriate but consistent for each channel. Focus on the level of detail you need to communicate. As an example, long-form communication. This provides valuable information to a highly invested audience that wants to learn more about the change and what is happening. Short-form communication, however, is more mobile-friendly, obviously, than its long-term counterpart, allowing it to reach a wider audience. The easier it is to read, the more likely it is a short attention span, more socially minded person will read it. Think about the headlines. These accomplish one of two goals. They present the most important pieces of information in a 5 to 7 word headline. Alternatively, you can give only a snippet of the information so that the reader is coerced to read more. The strategy you choose depends on the sensitivity of the information and your overall goal for distributing it. If you want to inform as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time, then obviously short form communication applies. If you want a moderate amount of people to be completely informed, then long form communication applies. Rather than just rely on your own experience and intuition in creating a communication plan, how about surveying and talking to your stakeholders and asking them how they would like to be communicated to? They'll tell you. I've done it before, I've done it several times. They'll tell you, and then if you start using those communication channels, you're more likely to get the messages through. Okay. So once you know that, once you know how your stakeholders want to be communicated to, you can create that all-encompassing communications plan accordingly. So we've kind of come full circle, really. I talked at the beginning about a communication plan, so it's fitting that we end with a communication plan. But wait, not quite. I mentioned this kind of before in passing, but look at where we're at now because of COVID-19. No physical interaction. So online face-to-face channels have come into their own. I'll ask the question, is this a seismic shift in how we're going to communicate in the future? Think about it. I'm not sure personally. I kind of have the view, and I think that we may just well go back to the way we did before, maybe with a few more constraints, potentially, but I think we will go back to the way we went before, but we will have obviously that fallback position of online face-to-face now that we all know how to use it. Okay, so thanks again. One more week done. See you again next week.